Everyone calls this exercise the world's greatest stretch, and 20 years or so ago, it's something that I would have programmed in my mobility routines, but then I found something that no one else talks about. In this video, I'm going to show you why this isn't the world's greatest stretch, what you should do instead, and what you can do to still make this exercise useful. First, let's have a quick think about why so many mobility coaches regurgitate this exercise. Firstly, the name. Who doesn't want to include something called the world's greatest stretch? But if you ask a whole heap of different coaches what it does, you'll probably get a whole heap of different answers. Everything from T-spine rotation, hip openers, groin release. I've even seen things like energy release. The problem with an exercise that promises all these different things, it usually isn't good at anything in particular. And the promise of it being such an all-encompassing exercise is probably why I used to train it many years ago, until I noticed people couldn't really get in this position well. And it became more about the position rather than what you were actually getting from it. And that's the problem with a lot of these things that are so-called mobility. The movement itself is the end goal rather than what we need to get out of it. So we're sacrificing our needs and the goals for the sake of the movement. And I see that as a big problem. For example, compensations that I'd see where people sacrificing integrity for the sake of doing the movement would be things like opening that front leg as they try to rotate, just moving the arm and not really getting any thoracic rotation itself, and maybe dropping that leg to avoid any kind of load or stretch into the front of the hip. And in my Google quest, just to see what other people kind of doing this thing, this was the first video that came up in my search. And it's a pretty good example of some of those compensations. And my question here would be, if you have someone doing this, or this is you yourself doing this sort of exercise, is it beneficial to continue to try and bluff your way through it and with these compensations? Or is it better to figure out what is it that you're missing in order to do this exercise well? Or even just go, what am I trying to get out of it? Why don't I address those issues individually? Think about what we're getting out of the exercise. We're getting that back hip on stretch, the front of the hip, the quad, etc. We should be getting some rotation through the thoracic spine. And that front glute and hamstring certainly have to have a reasonable range of motion in order to get into the movement. And also, as we rotate the other way, getting a lot of range of motion into the groin and the adductor. The thing with this exercise, they're prerequisites. So like a lot of mobility exercise, you're showing what you have in terms of range of motion rather than developing it. In that regard, this world's greatest stretch is actually a really good screen. You can use it to figure out where you might have deficiencies in the movement, and particularly in terms of deficiencies on one side to the other, and then go away and work on those areas themselves. So let me show you a few examples of things that I think you should do instead with a few ideas in mind. One, we want exercises that translate to real world movement. So we want to make gains in our range of motion and our strength so we can use that off the mat. So we're doing something that helps our sport, helps our real life. The exercise I'll show you here also would help you to achieve the world's greatest stretch as well, with the idea that this is an expression of what we can do. So let's firstly look at an exercise for our adductors, for our groin. In this exercise, firstly here we're opening in the frontal plane. We want to move through three planes of motion. I'm going to drive my foot hard into the ground to give some load into that muscle. We want to get stronger here as well. Moving back, we're going to start to load a little bit more, and again, pushing that foot down hard into the ground for an isometric. That's how we're going to get strong at that end range of motion. We also want to give some rotational load here, and this is quite specific to the world's greatest stretch, as you would know. So you'll notice as we do things like this, it feels like that right hip wants to drop towards the opposite knee. So we're loading it in this plane of motion. We also need to understand adductors have a front and back attachment. So here we're getting that front attachment, probably more so on the left leg than the right, and I'm giving a bit of rotation to that to load it as well. Then we could move through these dynamically in order to help to own that range of motion and to use that range of motion as well. Once we're doing this, we could then start to transfer it into something bigger, more global, like the world's greatest stretch as well. But you can see here, I'm just moving through all these different planes of motion. Now, the biggest thing that's usually missing from this exercise is the rotation through your thoracic spine. And often that's limited by things like our lats and our pecs. So firstly, we might do a couple of things to open these areas up. This is just a simple lat stretch. We can also bring some force into that hand driving down if you're doing it on a pole, to also put an isometric there, as well as opening up through our pecs. You could find out where you're limiting rotation and then bring it in, and then bringing it into a dynamic movement here, where we are looking to move through some thoracic rotation here. We could also bring this into a seated position where we're moving rotationally here, but ideally we also want to come into these sort of things actively as well. So rather than just pushing with the hand, we're actually bringing our body around using the muscles involved in this sort of rotation. Now, often people avoid loading their quads, hip flexors in this exercise, and that can be a limiter as well. Particularly if we're not able to load here, we're usually going to round the back more, and that might even stop our thoracic rotation. So opening up through the hips is important. I have done videos on this exercise before. This is one of my favorites. I'd lead this into what I call a single leg reverse Nordic, where we're leaning all our weight into that back leg, make sure we're posteriorly tilting that pelvis and getting good load into both the muscle and the tendon. I also like coming into a long lunge where we are dropping the hip here, putting some load all the way across the front of the groin, both into that front hamstring and the back hip flexors, and even putting some more load here by taking our hands off the ground. And this is a nice one that is specific to the exercise itself as well. So if you're in a position where you can already access this exercise well, you can make it more useful for that transferring to things outside of the exercise, because we don't want to just get good at exercise, we want to get good at doing other stuff, unless you just want to look good on Instagram and that's your thing, whatever. What you can do in this is start to add some load. So things like coming into that long lunge position where we set ourselves up in, and looking to lift hands off the ground, bringing load into both the back leg and that front glute hamstring. Coming into rotation actively, so not using that hand to force into it, and just allowing your body to rotate, find its limit, and then lift the arm. This is a really nice way to get into there. And then in that front groin leg, pushing into the arm for an isometric, and then bringing the arm down and pushing the foot into the ground. Or if you're rotating in the other way, you can also do the isometric there. There's many ways you can do this exercise, obviously, and you would have seen that yourselves, whether you're rotating one side, rotating the other, dropping the elbow, doing it with some walking steps, it doesn't matter. Just find a way to add some more load into it, so you do have more benefit, more transferring of that usable strength into other movements. So is it the world's greatest stretch? I don't think so. I think it's a bit of a shitty exercise, but I think it's a really good screening tool for understanding your own capacity. When you understand that, grab some of these other things. You can then go back and retest and see if you've made any improvements in the exercise itself. If you are using it, put some force into it, try and find ways to allow it to transfer into other stuff. So if you're done with coaches who just regurgitate all this stuff and don't really know what they're doing with it, you can join my 12-week foundations program, grab the book. There's all sorts of things that I'm offering. If you're a trainer, there's certifications that you can also jump on. This video is part of my Mindless Mobility series. I don't think some people are going to love this one. Looking forward to the comments on it. And if you want to watch one of the others in the series, please click the video here, and I'll see you next time.